It's great to be joined today by Rick Doblin, who's the founder and executive director of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, a research and education nonprofit organization developing legal context for the uses of psychedelics and marijuana. So let's start sort of with the basics. When we talk about, I think people know what marijuana is, when we talk about psychedelics, what substances are under that umbrella that you're researching and working with?
Well, the word psychedelic was developed in the 50s to mean mind manifesting. So we include LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, ayahuasca, the classic psychedelics, but we also include marijuana and MDMA in that broad definition.
And when people hear, oh, you're studying psychedelics, there could probably be a few different ways to sort of interpret what it is that you're doing. So tell us a little bit about the work that the organization does.
Essentially, we are a nonprofit pharmaceutical company. And so we are trying to develop psychedelics and marijuana into government-approved prescription treatments. And by prescription treatments, at least for the psychedelics, not marijuana, it's psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So there'll be a package that will be approved by the FDA, by European Medicines Agency, and other regulators that is this combination of the drug plus psychotherapy.
So we're skipping a little bit ahead, then we'll come back to the legal context and the limitations on research. But because you talk about in combination with psychotherapy, what type of professional would you imagine would be sort of licensed to prescribe something like this? Would it be the professional doing the psychotherapy? Would it be a psychiatrist who might be overseeing a non-medical therapist? Or how would that work in your mind?
Well, right now there's these are drugs that are in Schedule 1, and the DEA only licenses physicians to prescribe them. But once they're approved by the FDA and they're moved into Schedule 2, it'll still be limited to physicians to actually have the licenses, but the professions that will be there with the patients, the doctors will be in charge of the medical supervision. But it could be psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers. We work with a male-female co-therapist team, and one of them has to have a license as a psychiatrist or psychotherapist. But the other can be a student learning to be a psychotherapist, can be a nurse, can be even somebody that has no license at all as an assistant. But it's basically a male-female co-therapist team that's with people for the entire psychedelic session, which usually lasts about 8 hours. And there's other non-drug psychotherapy sessions before and after to prepare and to integrate.
In a bit, we're going to get into some of the possible benefits of this type of these types of therapies. But before we do that, I mean, as far as research goes, what can legally be done in terms of research into some of these uses? And is the Schedule 1 scheduling of most of these substances one of the biggest barriers to really opening research?
The Schedule 1 of status of these drugs is a challenge, but the FDA is willing to approve research with Schedule 1 drugs. The DEA has been willing to give licenses, and institutional review boards, otherwise known as ethics committees or IRBs, have been willing to approve research. So there are extra hurdles to do research with Schedule 1 drugs, but the main limitation is not regulatory, it's financial. Since the drugs that we're talking about are in the public domain, they're off patent, the uses are also mostly in the public domain, and so we're having to rely on donations to the nonprofit to fund the research. And we're able to do this, though. So far, MAPS, I started in 1986, so 31 years ago, and we've raised over $40 million during that time. And we're anticipating phase 3 for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD is going to cost $25 million. So those are the main limitations. The fundraising challenges, not so much the regulatory status.
How big of an organization are you? I mean, how many staff work with you?
About 25, actually.
Wow.
So, a large group of them are just on our clinical team managing the research. But then we also have a public education and communications team. We have a harm reduction team. We do work at festivals to support people who have difficult psychedelic experiences. We have a small policy and advocacy team. We have a fundraising team, and we have an operations team.
So let's start to dig into the sort of nitty-gritty. Question one, have you tried all of the substances that you're researching?
Yes, I have.
You have, okay. And was there one in particular that you were most surprised by or had effects that you didn't anticipate?
I would say I was most surprised by MDMA because I learned about it in 1982. And, I started doing psychedelics when I was 17 years old in 1971. And 1972 is when I decided to focus my life on this. And I was very much interested in the mystical experience, the profound depths of the psyche that you could get into for psychotherapy. And so when I heard about MDMA in 1982, I was told, here's a drug, it helps you to talk with people, it helps you to feel love, it helps you to be a better listener. And I thought, I already feel love, I already feel fine, I can talk to people. And then I saw a group of people doing it, and they were just sitting in a circle talking to each other. And I was thinking, what's profound about that? Because, when you take a fair amount of LSD or psilocybin, you can't even talk. You're having these sort of really profound, nonverbal, pre-verbal, you could even say, deep emotional experiences that are dissolving your ego and blending you with the universe, with other things. And so it really, MDMA didn't really impress me, but I was smart enough to buy some and take some home and do it with my girlfriend. And that's where I was really shocked at how profound and deep the experience was.
And when you think about the possible applications of such an experience to treating medical conditions, talk to us a little bit about what the possibilities are. What types of conditions might benefit from the use of something like MDMA or the other psychedelics that you're researching?
Well, there's a whole range of applications. So MDMA reduces the fear response to challenging emotions. It reduces activity in the amygdala. So it's very effective in post-traumatic stress disorder, in anxiety disorders, in very many kind of fears, agoraphobias, all sorts of fears of different things. I think it would be very helpful in social anxiety. We've done a study with autistic adults with social anxiety and showed that MDMA-assisted therapy was incredibly helpful. We've done work with people who are facing life-threatening illnesses and they're scared of dying with MDMA. I think it would be even good for physical illnesses in some ways, like fibromyalgia. Or MDMA really opens up the mind-body connection in a way where I think it can be helpful for different kind of ways in which certain emotions get somaticized into the body. It'd be good for depression. It's tremendous for couples therapy, but couples therapy is not a disorder, so we're not able to get it approved by the FDA for that. Similarly, you can't get drugs approved by the FDA for personal growth, for spirituality, but you could do research into those areas. You just can't get them approved as medicines. That will require broader reform. But psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy has been used, particularly when we talk about LSD or ibogaine or psilocybin, for nicotine addiction, alcohol addiction, heroin addiction, opiates, other opiates as well. These drugs have a wide range of applications for emotions that have been suppressed and for helping people have these spiritual experiences, the unitive connective experiences that can impact depression, anxiety, sense of aloneness, and also meaning and purpose.
Let's pick up our conversation there with Dr. Rick Doblin, who's the founder and executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and we'll continue on that note tomorrow. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Rick Doblin, the founder and executive director of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Rick, when we left off, we were talking about some of the possible medical applications of psychedelics and marijuana. I want to now dig in a little more specifically as to how some of these substances can be used. If people have Googled this topic generally, they've probably come across the term microdosing. So can you tell us, what is microdosing?
Microdosing is using low, very low amounts of the drugs, so low that you don't necessarily know that you've taken it. It doesn't interfere with your perceptions, doesn't interfere with your logical train of thought, but there's a little bit of an opening in terms of imagination, in terms of creativity. Microdosing, particularly for the classic psychedelics like LSD or mescaline from peyote or psilocybin from mushrooms, microdosing of those drugs is used by people in Silicon Valley for creativity purposes. It's used for people with long-lasting, sort of low underlying depression. It can give an energy lift. Microdosing is used for people who want to pay more close attention to what's happening during the day, and they have a little bit more of an expansive connection to creativity, to inspiration. And so we find that it's such low doses that toxicity concerns really don't matter. And people are experimenting with it all over the world now and finding quite a different sort of use. However, I should say that it's in contrast to the full dose, which produces this acute experience that can be deep and profound, and then in many cases make it so that people's psyche has fundamentally changed so that they don't need to keep doing the large doses. Microdoses are meant for sort of long-term use over extended periods of time, but even then it's not used every day. It's often every third day. Different people have different patterns, but more and more people are experimenting.
You mentioned toxicity. I mean, is it from a sort of safety perspective, is a microdose safer than a full dose?
Well, from a psychological point of view, yes. These drugs are not toxic physiologically. You can't overdose and die on LSD. Similarly, mescaline and psilocybin, the classic psychedelics are very safe physically, but you could say there's challenging psychological effects that come from this ego dissolution, that come from material emerging from the unconscious. And so people need to be in a safe and supportive way when they do full doses. But when you do these microdoses, it doesn't produce those kind of experiences. So you could say it was safer psychologically and physiologically to whatever extent there is any concerns, which are really pretty much non-existent. It's just even less so.
Is the term safe even, I mean, I guess it's sort of a confusing term in a sense. I read a Reddit AMA that your organization participated in on this, and there was a line that said, "We don't claim that psychedelics or any drugs are safe, but that in particular situations, the benefits outweigh the risks." Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, everything has risks. And so to say that there's no risks, safe implies no risks. There was a sad story of a young man who died practicing football in the summer here in my town, overheating. So, high school sports are not safe. Nothing is 100% safe, but when we talk about, and the FDA, you have to prove safety and efficacy in order to get a drug approved. But it's a balance, it's a relative balance between what's the benefits and what's the risks. And I think it's kind of a foolish situation to try to say that there's something that's perfectly safe. People can drown in water, is water safe? So it's always the conditions in which you use it. There's no such thing as a substance that is safe that could never be harmful under any circumstances.
So along those lines, what's your sense of how, and actually, I'm not even sure that I know what drug education is currently like in, elementary, middle, and high school. I was in elementary school during the time of DARE, drug abuse resistance education, where a cop came in and basically told us, using an analogy of aliens coming down from a spaceship and offering you bad things, that you just say no. And looking back at it, talking about it with friends, it just seems completely laughable that there's any sort of positive impact of that type of drug education. What's your sense of how drug education is taking place now with children, and what effect that has on those children as adults in terms of the relationship to drugs?
Well, Dare is still used, and in fact, it's used in the local schools here.
Hmm.
And all three of my children, my youngest just graduated high school, and she had to go through Dare. And the kind of research that's been looked at Dare is it's actually harmful in a lot of cases
Mm.
because they say things that when you're in fifth grade, when you're young, and then they sort of have further kind of programs in high school, they say things that are not true. They exaggerate the risks, they deny the benefits, and as children grow older and realize that they've been misinformed, they start questioning everything.
Hmm.
And so all drug education that they get has lost credibility. And who are police officers to teach science, to teach about the effects of drugs? It's a boondoggle to get money to police. It's designed to scare children. And I think what we really need is honest and balanced drug education. And we don't have that currently today still.
What's your sense of the legalization of psychedelics? I mean, we talk about it's interesting that it's even police officers, as you mentioned, that are teaching this because marijuana in particular, it's been seen as one of the key sort of law enforcement issues over the last who knows how many years of the war on drugs. Where do you think the legalization of psychedelics will sort of be, if at all, within this legalization movement we're seeing on marijuana?
We're assuming psychedelics will be legal around 2035,
Huh.
so a little bit less than 20 years. We're anticipating that marijuana will become legal in the United States on a federal level around 2024. We're anticipating that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for depression will become medicines around 2021. And then there'll be around a decade or a little bit more than a decade of psychedelic clinics being established, eventually thousands of them across the United States. Every town that has a hospice center will one day have a psychedelic psychotherapy treatment center. And once we've had a bit more than a decade of medicalization and people really getting a sense that they know people that have benefited from it, that they know the risks can be minimized and the benefits can be maximized in certain conditions, and that they realize that a lot of the benefits are not just for people with clinical indications, but it can be looked at as preventative medicine or personal growth or spirituality or creativity, that we need to go beyond the medical model. So I think legalization will be 2035, something like that.
What do you think will be the driver of that? Will it be, I don't know, the medical community? Will it be local government? Will it be states to the point where eventually you get some kind of federal consensus? Like, what will be the mechanism through which that happens?
Well, I think people will look at the legalization of marijuana and will try to learn from that about whether other drugs should be legalized. And I think what we'll find is that when you have legalized these drugs, you're better able to control them. You're better able to offer help to those people that have problems with drugs, that they're not going to be stigmatized. We'll be putting money into drug treatment and treatment on demand instead of putting people in prison. And I think once people realize that the tax income that's going to come from the legal sale of these drugs will more than cover the problems with these drugs, and people will start to understand the fundamentally repressive and anti-human rights aspects of policies of prohibition, that people will mature over the next 20 years to really realize that prohibition is counterproductive. And it's never really been about stopping drug abuse or treating drug abuse. It's always been about persecution of minorities and scapegoating. It's not about public health. And I think once we replace the criminal justice approach with the public health approach, people will see a lot of benefits from it.
We've been speaking with Dr. Rick Doblin, founder and executive director of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Thanks so much for talking to us about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a very important discussion. I'd be very curious what your listeners have to say about it.